If your observer has already awakened, then why do you still feel pulled back to the same old thoughts, the same impulsive reactions, the same old fears, the same feeling that something invisible still holds you back? There's a subtle conflict happening inside you, and maybe you've never stopped to look directly at it. There is a new self that has already begun to emerge, calmer, more lucid, more present. A self that already understands the path is not to fight, but to observe. But at the same time, there is a hidden force that insists on pulling you back, as if there were an invisible rope tied to your heels, and the more you try to move forward, the tighter it gets, the more it pulls. Could it be the fear of change, or the old habit of resisting? Are you truly conscious, or have you just learned to wear a new mask? What if what still holds you back isn't the external world, or others, or the past, but an old version of yourself that hasn't yet learned to let go? Today, we're going to enter that space between two worlds, the old self that survives and the new observer that awakens. And maybe for the first time, you'll start to see who is really making your decisions. The old self has no face. It's not an external figure, nor a separate entity. It's an invisible structure, shaped by years of reactions, undigested traumas, memories stuck in the body, and repeated emotional habits. It lives within you like a silent, automatic code that learns to survive by avoiding, controlling, resisting. And it does all this in the name of safety. You might call it ego, conditioned mind, or simply emotional past. But what matters isn't the name. It's recognizing its presence. It's that subtle voice that says this won't work, even when everything seems ready. It's the anxiety that arises without a clear reason, just because something new is coming. It's the urge to self-sabotage, to pull away from real connections, to hide from yourself when life offers expansion. The old self isn't ill-intentioned. It was created in moments when you needed to protect yourself. Maybe in childhood, when it wasn't safe to feel, or in relationships where love was too risky, or in situations where expressing yourself meant rejection. It was born to keep you alive, but over time, it started to keep you trapped. And like all programming, it seeks repetition. It doesn't want change, because changing means dying. And for that old part, dying means losing control. That's why, even after awakening moments, you might find yourself acting, thinking, and feeling the same as before. It's as if something inside is always trying to bring you back to the familiar, the predictable, the safe, even if that safe is made of pain. The old self hides in the details, in how you blame yourself for feeling too much, in how you try to predict everything to avoid being caught off guard, in the belief that you need to fix yourself before you deserve peace. It's a master at camouflaging itself as logic, rationality, even spirituality. Because yes, the old self can also wear new clothes and use pretty words, but its intention remains the same, to keep you away from the now. It doesn't want you to observe, because to observe is to exit autopilot. It's to bring light where there was only impulse, and light deprograms. Light reveals. Light weakens the grip of repetition. But here's the most important revelation. The old self is not the enemy. It is just a part of you that got stuck in time, that learned to survive in one way, and was never updated. It doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be understood. Because as long as you fight it, you are playing its game. But when you start to observe, something changes. You realize it speaks, but you no longer need to obey. That it feels fear, but you no longer need to retreat. That it seeks control, but you can choose presence. And in that space between impulse and choice, freedom is born. Yes, the old self will resist. It will try to pull you back. It will use tiredness, doubt, comparison, guilt, because it survives through your unconsciousness. But every time you breathe, feel, and don't react, every time you say internally, "I see you," without judgment, something in it dissolves, because it cannot command a field where presence exists. And maybe this is the greatest paradox of the spiritual journey. You don't evolve by fighting your old parts. You evolve when you stop identifying with them. When you realize that what you feel does not define who you are, that what you lived doesn't need to dictate what you vibrate now. The old self is just the echo of a story that has already ended. And the more you insist on reliving it, the more reality brings back the same scenarios, the same pains, the same cycles. But when you look directly with compassion and firmness, it begins to dissolve like smoke. Because consciousness is the only fire that burns illusion. And so, without war, just with presence, the old self begins to yield. Not because you destroyed it, but because you stopped feeding it. There is a silent moment that cannot be forced or predicted. An instant when, in the middle of an old reaction, something inside you simply sees. It doesn't react, it doesn't judge, it just observes. This is the birth of the observer. It's not a mystical explosion, nor a sudden enlightenment. It's subtle, almost imperceptible. Sometimes it happens when you're on the edge of an old habit, and for the first time, you feel that you might not follow the impulse. Other times, it arises amidst chaos, when everything inside screams for control, and you, without knowing how, choose to breathe, pause, feel. Observing is that space between stimulus and response. It's where freedom begins. Because while you are identified with the old self, everything happens automatically. You think and believe the thought, feel and get lost in the emotion, react and later feel guilty. But the observer sees the thought coming, notices the emotion forming, recognizes the impulse without being dragged by it, and that changes everything. The old self reacts, the observer witnesses. The old self judges, the observer contemplates. The old self seeks control, the observer chooses presence. This new center of consciousness is not a character you need to create. It already exists in you. It always has. But it was covered by layers and layers of conditioning. Each time you get distracted, identify, get lost in internal dramas, you move away from it. But it never moves away from you. And when you access it, even for seconds, something inside relaxes. Because the observer doesn't want to change what you feel. It just wants to feel truthfully. It doesn't want to fix what's in you. It wants to see without filters, without fear, without the need to escape. Observing is the first act of freedom, because everything that isn't seen commands you, but everything that is looked at with presence begins to dissolve. It's as if the light of conscious observation slowly deprograms the old commands engraved in the subconscious. You start to realize, for example, that the fear that seemed unbearable is not so big when you feel it fully. That the anger that used to dominate you begins to transform when you stop repressing it and start welcoming it. That the sadness that felt like a prison was just an unmet request for presence. The birth of the observer is the turning point of your journey. Because from that moment on, you stop being just a product of your past and begin to be a co-creator of your now. It is at this point that the quantum field, which responds to your vibration, starts to hear a new frequency. Because conscious observation not only changes your inner state, it alters your energetic signature. It changes the way the universe responds to you. But there is a subtle challenge here. The spiritual ego may try to appropriate the observer. It may make you believe you are observing, when in truth you are just judging in a more sophisticated way. It can use the language of consciousness to keep avoiding pain. And that's why observing requires humility. It requires surrender. It requires being willing to feel everything, including what you've spent your whole life trying to avoid. Observing is not about becoming better, it's about becoming whole. It's about seeing the parts in conflict and not picking a side. It's about embracing both the light and the shadow, without clinging to either. It's about realizing that your worth is not in never reacting, but in recognizing with clarity each time you almost fell and chose to return. The observer is not a goal. It is a presence, a state, an inner space where everything can be felt without anything needing to be denied. And the more you access this state, the weaker the old self becomes, because it doesn't survive in the light of consciousness. It needs your absence, your distraction, your identification. but the observer is living presence. It is the now looking at the now. At this moment you might be thinking, but I still identify, still fall, still repeat. And that's okay. The observer is not perfection, it is choice. And each time you choose to see, even if it's after you've fallen, it gets stronger. That's how the new self is born, not as an idea, but as an embodied experience of seeing, feeling, and existing without getting lost. You wake up with intention. Maybe you even meditate, read something inspiring, feel that spark of presence lit in your chest. But throughout the day, without noticing, something starts to slip. A subtle irritation, a silent comparison, an inner voice saying it's no use trying so hard. And when you realize it, you're already back in the same cycle, the same vibration as before. This is the silent struggle. It doesn't scream. It doesn't impose itself. It infiltrates. It starts small, disguised as tiredness, rationality, or the pursuit of realism. And without fanfare, the old self resumes control. It knows it can no longer dominate you in the same ways as before. So it changes strategy. It becomes more sophisticated, uses convincing arguments, sabotages delicately, and often disguises its resistance as spirituality. Yes, because even your quest for consciousness can become a distraction if it's driven by the fear of feeling. How many times have you caught yourself seeking more knowledge, more techniques, more practices, just to avoid the discomfort of simply being with yourself? How many times have you used the discourse of evolution to escape the wound that only wanted to be seen? The old self is cunning. It knows that if it can't stop your expansion, it can try to delay it. And the tool it uses most is subtle self-sabotage. It shows up in spiritual procrastination, that I'll meditate later, which keeps postponing presence. It shows up in comparison. Look how others are already more advanced. It shows up in disguised perfectionism. I won't start until I'm 100% aligned. And it shows up mainly in doubt. What if none of this works? But the observer sees. It perceives that doubt is not wisdom, it's fear. It sees that perfectionism is not care, it's control. It sees that comparison is not motivation, it's devaluation. And it's at this point that the internal struggle intensifies, because the old self realizes it's being seen, and it starts to fight harder, tries to prove that it's still necessary, that without it, you'll get lost, that you can't trust the now, the intuition, the feeling. This old part doesn't want to be excluded, but it doesn't know how to be included without taking over. So, it confuses, makes you think you're advancing when you're just going in circles, makes you seek external practices when the call is to be still, makes you demand signs from the universe when the only missing answer is your presence. That's why the silent struggle is not one with force. It's one with consistency, with small acts of presence, with the choice to feel instead of fleeing, with the courage to slow down when everything inside wants to speed up, and above all, with the decision to no longer negotiate with the old self, to not give in to its arguments, even when they seem logical. Because the old self doesn't speak in words, it speaks in frequencies. And you feel when you're vibrating in it. It tightens the chest, speeds up the thoughts, triggers automatic actions. And the antidote to all of this is to return. Breathe. Feel the body. Name what you feel without judgment. Bring presence to the now, even if just for a few seconds. This is the true silent revolution, to be whole where you used to divide yourself. If this silent struggle describes you, if you felt this subtle conflict between your high intention and the invisible saboteurs, then comment now. I see the sabotage, and I choose presence. This phrase is not just a statement. It's an energetic cut. It's a vibrational command that signals to the field, I am aware. I am choosing again. And if this content brought clarity or echoed something within you, like this video. It helps this message reach more people who are at exactly this point in the journey. Because in the end, this struggle is not a mistake. It's a rite of passage. And the more you see, the less it dominates you. You can change your thoughts, adjust your posture, repeat affirmations. You can watch all the videos, memorize catchphrases, even feel like something in you has truly changed. But if you don't honestly observe what you're vibrating when you're not trying to vibrate anything, you'll realize that despite the new gestures, reality still echoes the same pattern. The quantum field doesn't respond to what you wish. It responds to what you are when you stop trying to be. It responds to your baseline frequency, the one that stays when you're not practicing presence, the one that vibrates in silence, in the gaps between thoughts. That's why, often, even after great insights, you feel as if nothing has truly changed, because the oldest vibrational command is still operating in the background. It's like a song that keeps playing, even when you overlay a new sound. Until you turn off the original track, the new one won't hold. It may show up, but it soon dissolves, because the field is obeying a deeper programming, one that was written the moment you believed you had to fight to exist, that you had to protect yourself to survive, that you had to resist to deserve love. And this old command is stronger than any superficial intention, because it is emotional, it is cellular, it is energetic. You can say, "I trust," but if anxiety vibrates inside, the field hears anxiety. You can declare, "I deserve," but if guilt vibrates behind it, the field responds to guilt. You can affirm, "I already am," but if underneath you're still trying to prove something, the field mirrors the need to prove. The field doesn't negotiate with words, it reads vibration, and true vibration is the one that remains when no one is watching. But this is not a reason for guilt. It's a call to depth, a chance to stop operating only on the surface, to dive into the vibrational roots of your reality, to realize that all conscious creation first requires a silent reconfiguration of your base state. That's why observing is not a luxury, it's a quantum tool, because only when you observe with real presence, you deactivate the unconscious commands. Only when you stop resisting what you feel, the body starts to vibrate differently. Only when you include what you're trying to exclude, the field begins to collapse a new reality. It's not what you think, it's what you vibrate when you're not thinking. This phrase needs to be felt, not just understood, because the old self can even simulate positive thoughts, but only the observer is capable of sustaining a new vibrational frequency with authenticity. And here is a key point. The quantum field doesn't respond to your idealized version. It responds to your integrated version, the one that acknowledges shadows without fleeing. That doesn't pretend to be fine, but allows itself to be whole even when in process. That feels without guilt. That welcomes without judgment. That vibrates with truth. When you start vibrating from that place, you no longer need to convince the universe, because the universe is already responding, not as instant magic, but as vibrational coherence. What you are begins to become what you see. That's why some people keep asking for signs and receive nothing, because they ask with their mind, but vibrate with fear, and the field returns confusion. Others ask for nothing, but live in alignment, because their vibration is already a silent request and a constant permission. So maybe the big question is not, how do I change my reality? But rather, what frequency am I emitting when I think no one is listening? There lies the oldest command, and it doesn't need to be fought. It needs to be replaced, not with force, but with presence, with the consistency of someone who is no longer interested in appearing conscious, but in truly vibrating a new consciousness. And this vibration doesn't come from effort. It comes from resting in oneself, from the breath that feels, from the body that listens, from the truth that welcomes. When that happens, the quantum field has no choice. It responds, it mirrors, it manifests. Because the field doesn't judge, it simply reveals what you most insist on hiding, your real vibration. Have you ever felt as if you were present, but still being dragged inside? As if the mind says, "I'm here," but the body is still reacting to the past? This is the invisible rope. It doesn't hold back your steps. It holds back your vibration. It's an energetic tie created by years of escape, tension, and absence. And it doesn't loosen by willpower. It loosens through grounding. Being grounded in the now is not just being aware of the present moment. It is being whole in it. It's allowing your attention to inhabit the body, not just the mind. Letting your presence descend from concept to sensation. Because as long as your consciousness is only in your head, the old self will continue operating backstage. The body is the truest mirror of your vibrational state, and that's why the path to release doesn't start with changing thought, but by inhabiting the body. When you feel the now in your chest, your hands, your breath, something changes, a subtlety breaks, and the rope starts to give. The grounding practice is not magical, but it is transformative. It doesn't require belief, only surrender, and its power lies precisely in its simplicity, feeling what is here without fleeing, observing what manifests without judging, naming honestly what you used to repress or explain away with spiritual rationalizations. Breathing is the first step, but not just as a technique. Breathing as someone returning home. As someone who recognizes the body as a temple, not an obstacle. Feeling your feet on the ground, the air entering your nostrils, the weight of your body on the chair or floor. This is not small. This is foundational. Because the old self doesn't live in the now. It needs the anticipation of the future or the memory of the past to exist. It feeds on absence, haste, distraction. But when you anchor your attention in the now, it starts to lose territory. It may still try to command, but its voice becomes distant. Because the frequency of the now is denser, more stable, more truthful. You begin to perceive thoughts as clouds, emotions as waves, impulses as echoes, and you no longer need to react to any of them. Because you are anchored, because you are feeling what you feel, without letting that define who you are. Grounding doesn't stop you from feeling pain, but it stops the pain from swallowing you. It doesn't eliminate fear, but it prevents fear from deciding for you. It doesn't silence all thoughts, but it gives you a safe space where they no longer own your truth. And the more you practice this embodied presence, the more your vibration stabilizes. And a stable vibration is like a new code being sent to the field. The field begins to recognize that the old command is no longer dominant, that there is a new center vibrating there. Not by the force of mental repetition, but by the constancy of bodily presence. This is what breaks the rope. When attention, emotion, and energy align in the now. When you stop fighting the old self and simply stop feeding it with distraction. When you stop running from yourself and decide to stay, to feel, to welcome. Yes, it takes courage, because feeling without reacting is a revolutionary act. It's allowing old pain to dissolve without haste, letting anxiety reveal itself without fear, letting anger no longer need to be controlled but integrated. And all of this can only happen here, in this moment, in the now, where nothing is required except presence. Consistency is the secret, not perfection. Don't expect to feel complete in every practice. It won't always be comfortable, but each time you choose to return, to feel, to stay, a part of the old self unravels, not through confrontation, but through starvation. The technique is simple, but the surrender is deep. And the more you root yourself, the more you realize the now is not a place of passage. It is your true home. It is where the observer strengthens, where the vibration changes, where the rope begins to unravel. Because what holds you was never the past. It was your absence from the present. For a long time, we believed that evolving meant eliminating parts of ourselves, as if there were an eternal war inside the being between light and shadow, between consciousness and ego, between the awakened self and the wounded self. But this internal duality, when not understood, only deepens the division. And the more you try to destroy the old self, the stronger it gets, because everything you reject strengthens in the dark. The true path of expansion is not about defeating the old self. It's about seeing it with new eyes, Not the eyes of criticism, but of compassion. Not the eyes of judgment, but of presence. Because the old self is not an internal enemy. It is, above all, a part of your story that got stuck in time. It's that child who learned to stay silent to avoid rejection. The teenager who decided to harden to avoid getting hurt again. The adult who repeated the same pattern 1,000 times, just to feel safe, even if in pain. It doesn't need to be fought. It needs to be included. It needs to be embraced as a part that only knows how to survive, but also longs to rest. Because the old self is exhausted, it carries the tension of years trying to protect you from a pain that no longer exists, and only the new observer has the vibrational maturity to say, "You can let go, I am here." Integration happens when you stop running from your old parts, when instead of denying you draw closer, when instead of correcting you listen, when instead of demanding evolution, you offer presence. This is liberating, because as long as you try to force change, you remain stuck in the logic of control. But when you observe with truth, you begin to rewrite, not the past itself, but the way it vibrates within you. The story may have been painful, but it no longer needs to be a prison. And then, something miraculous happens. The old self transforms, not by being pressured, but by being seen. It's as if, upon receiving presence, it stops fighting. As if, upon finally being understood, it no longer needs to react. This is where deep wisdom is born. Not the kind that comes from books, but the kind that emerges from silence. The wisdom that understands there is no light without shadow, that there is no expansion without embrace, that there is no high frequency without vibrational inclusion. Thoth, the archetype of sacred knowledge, does not represent technical knowing. He represents silent knowing, that which integrates light and shadow within, that which rejects nothing, only understands everything. He holds in one hand the feather of truth, and in the other the book of time, because only those who honor their story can write a new future. That is what you are being called to do now. To stop fighting what once was, to stop punishing yourself for patterns that only wanted to protect, to stop blaming yourself for still falling, and start rising with love. Because every part of you that you reject, the world reflects in a distorted way, but every part you include becomes freedom. This is the true inner alchemy, when the old self ceases to be a prison and becomes a bridge, when you realize it's not holding you back, it was just waiting to be seen. And now, with the observer awakened, you can do something different. You can embrace the part that hurt you and say, "I am no longer you, but I honor you, and I release you." And in that moment, there is no more struggle, no more rope. There is space, there is flow, there is the freedom to move on, without needing to erase anything, because everything that is integrated becomes fertile ground. Everything that is welcomed becomes wisdom. Everything that is loved stops hurting. You don't need to become someone new. You just need to stop identifying with what you no longer are, because the new is already here, silent, whole, waiting for you to stop resisting, so it can finally be. We've reached the end of our journey, but perhaps the true turning point is just beginning, because now you can no longer pretend you don't know. The old self may still speak, but you've already learned to listen from a different place, and every time you observe, you choose. Every second, life hands you this decision: repeat or rewrite, resist or allow, sleep or awaken. The observer doesn't need to win, it only needs to remain. So if this journey resonated with you, if something was touched within, write in the comments, "I choose to remain." That way I'll know you were here until the end. Present, feeling, whole. See you in the next video. And until then, may your presence be your greatest practice.